Brendan Dassey Trial Transcript, Day 8, continuing of Dr. Gordon's testimony. Why is it that these tests that have potentially nothing to do with suggestibility are important tools to consider as a forensic psychologist in making that determination? Well, there are different psychological characteristics that an individual might exhibit or might possess that in turn would increase or decrease the likelihood that they would be suggestible, and those include intellectual functioning, learning problems, memory problems, personality characteristics, whether a person, for example, is passive, withdrawn, socially introverted, quiet, anxious, wanting to be desiring to please, being in terms of social desirability. I must be missing something, but I don't recall right now. Now, and again, is this something that, for instance, Jensen recommends forensic psychologists to consider in addition to his suggestibility scale? Absolutely. Have you performed these tests on actual subjects to determine whether a person may be susceptible or vulnerable to suggestion before? Yes. And can you tell us how often or how many times that is that you performed these tests to assist you in making determinations of whether a person is vulnerable to suggestion? I should keep better records, but the number is, compared to the 2,500, is definitely lower. It's more like 5 to 10. And have you ever testified in a court such as this in that regard? Yes. And how often have you done that? 3 times. Well, 3 that I can recall. Attorney Kratz, Judge, I'm sorry. Again, I interpose an objection as to vague. In a court such as this, are we talking about a jury trial or are we talking about just before a judge? The court, that's fair. Attorney Kratz, I ask that be the court. Sure, it's a fair objection. It's sustained. Why don't you rephrase the question, counsel? Attorney Freeman, how often did you testify before a judge in regards to this type of topic? Before a judge that I can recall of those 5 to 10 times, twice. How often have you testified? Three times, I'm sorry. How often have you testified in this same regard in front of a jury? This is the first time. Now, you had a large number of cases that you indicated you testified before a court in the past. That's true. And this seems like a very small fraction. Is that correct? That's true. Why is it that you have such a smaller fraction of this type of evaluation or forensic psychology versus the other types that you testified about? Well, it's just an expansion, a gradual expansion of my practice. I mean, when I first started doing this, as I indicated, I only did mental commitment evaluations and guardianship. And then I began to do maybe a few custody evaluations and a fitness to stand trial or proceedings regarding disposition of cases regarding children or sentencing. And then it just, with the seminars I attended, with presentations I've given that required me to learn the material to present in a meaningful way to attorneys, then I gradually expanded my areas of expertise. Not to that point. I'm not a neuropsychologist, for example, so there's no way I'm going to expand to the point of talking about traumatic brain injury from a car accident and get up here and try to help the court. I mean, there's certain limitations. When you began your practice in psychology, was there sex offender groups at that time that you were aware of? Not that I was aware of. And now you testified earlier that one function of your employment is you are a facilitator in sex offender groups. I'm proud to say that I get to continue that by webcam on a weekly basis for the 3 groups I already run once I get to St. Louis, so yes. So that's something that's kind of progressed throughout your career. Even that has progressed to webcam, that's true. But the sex offender type of involvement in your field. I started off with 6 individuals that were in a group, and now I've seen 3,000. Would it be fair to state that your involvement in suggestibility evaluations is similar? That is, it's just beginning and it's beginning to progress? It's just beginning to progress. But whether it expands to the degree, I doubt it will expand to the degree that my sex offender work has because I'm 56 and don't have that many years to have it expand, you know. Specifically, turning to Brendan Dassey, you're familiar with Brendan, correct? I am. And how did you become familiar first with Brendan Dassey? You contacted my office. Did you have an opportunity to review collateral materials in preparation for a meeting with Brendan? I did. Can you describe what those materials were? It was a sheriff transcript regarding his being interrogated And I also viewed the actual video of those. Some individuals call them interviews when they're victims, interrogations when they're suspects. I viewed that as well. And I subsequently reviewed, after my report was prepared, school records regarding Mr. Dassey, Brendan, that date back to at least to 4th grade, if not before. Attorney Kratz: Judge, if I may, and I don't mean to interpose an objection, but when he indicates reviewing videotapes, if he could explain the dates of those interview videotapes so that we know what interview he was talking about, that might be helpful for us as well. The court: That's fair. If you're going to be alluding to materials that are dated, Dr. Gordon, why don't you, as part of your answer, reference the date? Yes, sir. The court: Okay. The witness: Do you want me to do that now? The court: Go ahead. The witness: The written narrative was based on an interview that took place on February 27, 2006. I may have reviewed another one as well, I don't recall, but I know one was based on an interview of, or interrogation of, February 27, 2006. Did you have an opportunity to review a DVD of a videotaped statement on March 1, 2006? Yes. And you indicated you'd also reviewed a number of school records as well, correct? I sure did. And at one point were you provided with copies of a CD involving phone calls from the jail? I was. Before you conducted any, well, let me ask you this, did you conduct any tests on Brendan Dassey? Yes. Now, before you conducted those tests, did you also perform a mental status examination of Brendan Dassey? I did. Why is it important to do a mental status evaluation of a individual? Well, it's important because it's advisable to obtain a variety of sources of clinical information, both collateral as well as testing, as well as interview, in order to conduct a comprehensive evaluation in order to come up with the most reliable and valid conclusion as possible. What observations, if any, did you have following your mental status evaluation of Brendan Dassey? Brendan Dassey's thought process was slow. There was, even in the interview, indication of mild to moderate mental impairment. He was slow to respond, his eye contact was poor, his affect was bland. To put that, his affect was blah, to put it unprofessionally. There was a mental status evaluation, also often includes a history, a social history, and he has a history of learning problems, as I noted per his report, confirmed by collateral data. He also talked to me about feeling very anxious and a loner in school, having few friends and feeling anxious, for example, when getting up to talk before a class. He felt very socially phobic and uncomfortable and alienated from his friends. Is the information that you obtained through the mental status examination important to consider as a forensic psychologist prior to or during the time that you perform additional tests? It's important to consider it prior to or during the administration of additional tests, because I have at my office, for example, 150 tests, and you want to tailor-make the evaluation to use tests that most directly address a given case. I mean, there's some tests that I would always use in a suggestibility evaluation, such as Gajensen, for example, but there might be others I might include depending on the interview and the initial results of the initial testing, and then I might add others as well. So would it be fair to state that, for instance, a person, if after you interviewed the person and they appeared to be of average or below average intelligence, you may not need to use tests that want to examine them for profound mental retardation? Well, if they had an average intelligence, I might have confirmed it with abbreviated IQ testing. If it was a person who was profoundly mentally retarded, they wouldn't have the capability of formulating an attempt to commit a crime, and they would be in an institution having their own personal daily needs taken care of. So you're not going to have somebody who's profoundly mentally retarded, for instance, complete the evaluations or probably read at a significant level. Well, they won't. They won't even be charged with a crime. Justin, doctor, in regards to your evaluation, doctor, you wouldn't provide those type of tests that don't appear to fit the personality of the individual you're examining? True. Okay. Can you briefly describe what tests you did conduct in regards to your evaluation of Brendan Dassey? Yes, the one, do you want me to talk about the Gajensen suggestibility scale? However you wish to start. Do you want to go chronologically with the tests that you performed? I have a list of them right here. I'm going to go straight from the top to the bottom if that's okay. That's fine. One is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory Adolescent version. It's based on a derivation. It was altered and normed with thousands of subjects from the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which had originally came out in the 1930s by Stark and Hathaway, psychiatrists and psychologists respectively from the University of Minnesota. It was subsequently revised as the MMPI-2 because they needed a more representative cross-section of individuals who represent the United States population, and they changed some given questions and they renormed it. And then at the same time, James Butcher, was instrumental on that, as well as Robert Archer, two psychologists, came up with the MMPI-A, which is the most widely used and researched objective test of adolescent emotional problems. It has many specific scales on it that one can review to form conclusions. Why did you choose this test, for instance, in your evaluation of Brendan Dassey? One is because it's so well respected and well researched. Secondly, it has scales on it that relate to suggestibility, such as passivity, social avoidance, social alienation, anxiety. Or in contrast, those that aren't indicative of suggestibility, which would be the absence of those, but instead it would be a person that's assertive or aggressive, or even that would, those factors could be evaluated from the MMPI. How many questions are involved in the MMPI? I was supposed to look that up, wasn't I? I believe 566 or 567. And how do you assess the answers? But it might be, I'm sorry to interrupt, it might be shorter on the MMPI. I might be talking about the MMPI-2 with my prior answer. Do you recall how many questions you asked of Brendan when you performed the MMPI-A? I administered the entire test, so it was at least 450 questions long or more. Attorney Kratz: Judge, I'll stipulate it's 478 questions. The witness: thank you, sir. The court: all right. Attorney Freeman: and how do you go about assessing the answers that the individual, for instance, in this case, Brendan, provided to you? Well, I used the true-false questions and see which items per scale were scored in a given direction, which would cause a scale such as depression or anxiety or social introversion to be lower or higher, and then I put it on a graph. I also used the validity scale scores to ascertain whether the profile is valid, whether it's accurate in terms of in terms of describing a person's personality. In regards to assessing the test, then, would you base your opinion on, let's say, any one answer of the 478 questions or a small number of answers? Absolutely not. Why not? Well, the test is constructed so that one looks at scales, not at individual answers, because taken out of context, a person's true or false answer to a given question could or provide confusing results, and it's not proper protocol. It's not the way that we're instructed to do that as psychologists in order to render reliable conclusions. I'm going to place on the screen Exhibit 229. In performing the MMPI, were you able to obtain results to the tests provided to Brendan? Yes. And what were those results? Well, the results, there are 10 basic clinical scales, but there are probably 100 or 50 supplemental scales that can be interpreted. All were within the average range, including the validity scale, showing that the profile was valid. All were in the average range except for 4, and those were the ones that you see on the screen. Can you, I believe you have a pointer. I don't want to blind anybody here. Okay. And so I'm clear you were able to assess Brendan on a number of topics and found him to be average in many of those areas. I assessed him on a number of scales, and all of them were within the average range except for 4. And these are the 4 here? Yes, sir. Why were these 4 in particular important to note in regards to your evaluation of Brendan? Well, I'll point out the one that was not hypochondriasis. That's not particularly related to suggestibility. Why did you include that on this? I just wanted to be straightforward and honest and say the scores that were high. I didn't want to leave any out. What is hypochondriasis? It's either a person that has who has significant concern about bodily functioning, health, and sometimes it can be because they have bona fide real health concerns, cancer, migraine, headaches, or whatever. Or it can be that they don't have physical symptoms, but they have a concern with their health anyway, or stress-related symptoms, and then that score would be elevated in those cases.